I think, right? I think so. If he's not, we'll make, there he is. All right, Abai is there. Let me find what I want to share. I've got a series of browser tabs up here. Can people see my screen?
Yep.
Looks great.
Cool. All right, so we're gonna try and keep this at 10 minutes. I'm gonna talk probably a little faster than I should, but off we go. So thank you to Ben and Zach and Jesse for inviting Abai and I to be here to represent Helium. Extremely excited. I will say that we get to give a lot of presentations. I suspect that this is one of the most unique and sort of exciting groups we've ever spoken with. So thank you for having us. Quick introduction on Helium. We've been around for about 8 years. We've been building what at this point is the largest wireless network in the world for about 3 years based on something called the Helium blockchain. And so I'm going to walk you through some sort of blockchain fundamentals for the Helium blockchain. And then one of the things that makes the Helium blockchain, in our opinion, fairly unique in the blockchain and crypto space is that it has a very straightforward and sort of demonstrable utility. And that utility is to send data over the internet, or wireless data rather, for things like sensors, and very soon things like handsets, and maybe even computers. So here we are. So this is explore.helium.com. I would invite people to go sort of check this out. This is all the public open data on the Helium blockchain and the network. This is powered by public APIs. The blockchain is open and permissionless and decentralized, and all this data is public. So a few things before we get started. So what you're looking at here is a map of what we call hotspots. So hotspots, I'll show you a picture in a second, are these things that look like wireless APs essentially, and they provide what's called LoRaWAN coverage. And people who deploy hotspots, actually, if anybody here is deploying a hotspot or is mining HNT or using the network, toss a thumbs up or a 1 in the chat. Always curious to see if people are part of the network already. And so this is San Francisco, which you may have figured out already. And these hexagons here represent some amount of Helium coverage. So in one of these hexagons, these green hexagons, there's some amount of Helium coverage being provided by these Helium hotspots. And the tokens trade at about 27.50 US. The market cap is what? Probably about 3.3 billion US. Definitely go look at some stats. We're not going to focus on that today. So this is what a Helium hotspot looks like. So they're very nice, very sort of clean industrial design. At this point, there's, I think, 40 different companies that are manufacturing hotspots that are approved by the Helium ecosystem. There's a whole process for that that's run by an organization called the Decentralized Wireless Alliance. And so you deploy one of these in your house, you plug it into power, you give an Ethernet connection, whether it's, internet connection, whether it's Ethernet or Wi-Fi or cellular. Sometimes people use cellular. And then it just builds this massive coverage network for devices and sensors using something called LoRaWAN, which is a protocol for long-range IoT data or Internet of Things data. And so again, I encourage people to sort of check this out. You can sort of go to many different vendors and buy a hotspot, and they show up in either a week or a month, and you deploy them and you become part of the network. Everybody should. So back to the utility side. So what's interesting about Helium is, we've built the largest wireless network in the world based on this incentive mechanism. So the Helium token, or HNT, it's a layer 1 utility token on a brand new blockchain called the Helium blockchain. And we started from scratch. We're not using anything sort of established, and maybe in the breakouts I can go into reasons why that is. But when it comes to utility, we have thousands of companies and developers, large and small, that are deploying actual applications on the network. And what I mean by that is, you have a sensor that sends data over this wireless link. Hotspots in this public network sort of pick it up, and then they route it back to a cloud application. I'm going to give you a demo end to end really quick, Abai and I, but here are some of the companies, and I'd encourage people to go through it. And so these are really interesting, sort of very important use cases. So for example, air quality, environmental monitoring, we have a ton of companies doing that. This is a really interesting company called Barnacle. I won't go too deep into any of these, but the sort of takeaway here is that there's a lot of companies actually using this network to power sort of mission critical business applications. So if you look at San Francisco, for example, and this is a site called mappers.helium.com. Okay. And so this is an overlay of actual sensor coverage that's been mapped by our community. So there's millions of people in the world now that are sort of involved in Helium in some capacity. We have hundreds of individuals who go out with sensors in hand and actually map the Helium coverage in different parts of the world. So for example, you can see in San Francisco, fantastic coverage. A quick note here, just because you don't see these overlays for the mapping doesn't mean there's not coverage. It just means that no one's been there mapping it. But over here, we've got bridges. These are pretty fun over here. We've got people that are actually taking these on planes. They're not supposed to, but we're not going to stop them. And so very interesting to sort of see the coverage develop. So for the demo, what we're going to do is demo this sensor here. So this is called an LDS-SO1. This is made by a company called Dragino. This is the docs site for the Helium network, so docs.helium.com. This is a door sensor. So a lot of you might have something that looks like this in your house. It probably uses Wi-Fi. It might use Bluetooth. It might even use LoRaWAN. And so this sensor is just a magnet. And once the small piece gets separated from the big piece, the door is opened, and that sends a packet over the Helium network to tell your application that the door is open or closed, and you can sort of take some sort of actions on that. So Bai has one of these in hand, an undisclosed location, and I'm going to ask him to send some packets. And so this is console.helium.com, and this is the sort of web-based interface that Helium Inc. provides the community to sort of manage sensors. So we've got some dots coming in here. Dots are very exciting. We love dots at Helium. And these is actual data coming off of this door sensor. So Bai is sitting there opening and closing the door at his house. And you can see here that we've got packets coming in. And there's 9 bytes worth of payload coming from this sensor, and it's being routed by a hotspot. And I'll show you this here. So 9 bytes worth of payload. The interesting things here are the hotspot, and I'll sort of talk about that in a second. And so this is a hotspot that was on that map that you just saw. Hotspots have these fantastic sort of names generated from their public key on the blockchain. All right, 3 minutes. And so this one here is Stable Rouge Puma. And that's picked up this packet that a Bai is sending from his house, or I think maybe he's at the office. It could be 100 yards away, it could be 2 miles away. The network properties are such that data travels a very long way to talk to one of these hotspots, and that's kind of the power of it. I kind of screwed up my screen here, hold on. So we've got this wired into a dashboard. There's a company called DataCake that's part of the Helium ecosystem. And we should be seeing battery voltages here, but I think I might have the numbers configured incorrectly. But inside of Helium console, we've wired up a connection to this thing called DataCake. And so pretty quickly, you can see how you can build a very nice sort of end-to-end application using the Helium network and a quick sensor. And I think this thing should toggle colors if doors are opening and closing, but for some reason it's not working. So to tie this all back together and show you how the blockchain really interacts here, I'm going to take this hotspot, so Stable Rouge Puma, and go back over here and see if I can get the API to cooperate. Stable Rouge. All right, okay. So this is the hotspot that is actually routing the data. And so you can see here that we got a bunch of stats about the hotspot. These are sort of RF and wireless specific. This is a antenna power for the hotspot. This is how high it is. These are sort of wallet addresses on the blockchain. You can click through there and see, again, everything is public. We can see that this hotspot has earned over the last 7 days about 0.339 HNT, over the last 30 days about 1.3 HNT. That's a little bit below the average, I would say, but it's still doing relatively well, especially when you consider that a hotspot only costs you about $300. So, and over here, we've got these connections that this hotspot has made to other hotspots on the network. This is tied to our incentive algorithm called proof of coverage, sort of the analogy to, or the sort of parallel to proof of work or proof of stake. We use something called proof of coverage. And so last thing I'll show in the 1 minute and 17 seconds I've got left here is the activity. So assuming enough time has passed, let's see if this actually shows up. Come on, API. There we go. So you can see here, and actually this is from earlier this morning. So the data that flows through this hotspot won't actually show up until about 45 minutes after that transaction has been processed on the blockchain for a handful of reasons. But you can see here that this hotspot's actually been transferring packets from sensors that are just active in San Francisco. We don't know who they are. This is a totally sort of open and permissionless thing. So people just show up, deploy sensors to that console interface that I showed, and then they're off and running on the network. And as long as they're paying the network in this thing called a data credit, they can just have free passage for their data. And so if we scroll through our rewards here, maybe I'll get lucky and sort of find it, we can actually see how this hotspot was compensated by the network for this packet traffic specifically. So if you operate a hotspot, you get rewarded for a bunch of different categories. Most of them are, come on API, most of them are related to actually providing the coverage. So these are for mining rewards for providing coverage and proving your coverage on the network. But if we look down here, we can see this here. And so this is actually for data, right? So Someone on the network, could have been an enterprise, could have been just a developer with a sensor in hand, deployed a sensor, paid the blockchain in this mechanism called a data credit, and then this operator of the stable Rouge Puma was rewarded in a very, 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 very small amount of HMT. But over time, that adds up to a big number. So with that, I will call it and yield back my time. Thank you.